He ruled the Chicago underworld with an iron fist and a frozen heart, a man who swore he would never bring a child into his violent empire. But one rainy night, Dominic Caruso walked into a struggling suburban bakery and locked eyes with Clara, a soft, curvy single mother just trying to survive. She was everything he wasn't supposed to want, fat, sweet, and fiercely protective of her little boy. One look and the most dangerous man in the city decided she was his. The Chicago rain lashed against the tinted windows of the sleek black Maybach, blurring the neon streetlights of the city's south side. In the back seat, Dominic Caruso sat in absolute silence, a terrifying stillness that usually meant someone was about to lose their life. At 34, Dominic was the undisputed head of the Caruso syndicate. He was a man chiseled from cold marble, possessing a ruthless intellect and a total lack of empathy that had propelled him to the top of the criminal food chain. The ruling commission of the Midwest had only one lingering complaint. About him, he had no wife and no heir. In their archaic world, a king without a bloodline was a liability, but Dominic harbored a deep, dark disgust for his own lineage. He had promised himself long ago that the Caruso bloodline would end with him. He never needed an heir. He never wanted one. Boss, his underboss Enzo Falcone, murmured from the passenger seat, glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. "The guy we're looking for, Bradley Tompkins. He's not at his apartment. Word on the street is he's been hovering around his ex-girlfriend's workplace, trying to shake her down for cash to pay us." Dominic's jaw tightened. He despised deadbeats, but he despised men who leeched off women even more. Where is she? A little place called Sugar and Spice Bakery off Fifth Avenue. It's barely keeping its doors open. "Drive," Dominic commanded. The luxury vehicle glided smoothly through the puddles, pulling up outside a small, warmly lit storefront that looked entirely out of place in the gritty neighborhood. Paint peeled from the window frames, but a cheerful hand-painted sign hung above the door. Dominic stepped out into the freezing rain, his tailored Tom Ford overcoat catching the wind. Enzo and two heavily armed enforcers moved to flank him, but Dominic raised a hand. "Wait here, I'll handle this." He didn't know why he wanted to walk in alone. Perhaps he was simply bored. The bell above the door chimed a bright, cheerful note as he pushed it open. Instantly, the harsh smell of city smog was replaced by the overwhelming, intoxicating aroma of vanilla, cinnamon, and melting butter. The shop was empty of customers. Behind the glass display case stood Clara Jenkins. Clara was 28, exhausted, and covered in a fine dusting of white flour. She was a big woman, undeniably fat, with thick, lush thighs, hidden beneath a faded pink apron, broad hips, and a soft, round stomach that pressed against the counter as she wiped it down. Her face was full and flushed, framing large, weary hazel eyes, and a mouth that looked entirely too soft for a world this cruel. She was the absolute antithesis of the rail-thin, surgically enhanced models that usually draped themselves over the men in Dominic's world. Yet the moment Dominic laid eyes on her, his lungs constricted. The air left the room. He stared at the curve of her throat, at the heavy, natural weight of her breasts, and the thick, beautiful softness of her arms. A sudden, violent surge of possessiveness, dark and primal, clawed its way up his spine. Clara looked up, startled by the towering, immaculate man standing in her tiny bakery. Her breath hitched. He radiated danger. From the sharp cut of his jaw to the dead, icy blue of his eyes, he was a predator. We're closing in 10 minutes, Clara said, her voice a sweet, melodic tremble that sent a jolt straight to Dominic's groin. "But I have some discounted pastries if you'd like." Before Dominic could speak, a small voice piped up from the corner. "Mommy, look at my dragon." Dominic's gaze snapped to the side. Sitting at a small, wobbly table in the corner was a little boy no older than 5, with messy brown curls and Clara's hazel eyes. He was colouring fiercely with a broken green crayon. "That's beautiful, Toby," Clara said, her entire face transforming. The exhaustion melted away, replaced by a radiant, pure love that hit Dominic like a physical blow. He had never seen someone look at a child like that. His own father had only ever looked at him, like a weapon to be sharpened. "Can I help you, sir?" Clara asked, stepping slightly out from behind the counter, her maternal instincts clearly flaring as she subtly placed her large, soft body between Dominic and her son. She was terrified of him, yet she was shielding her boy. "I'm looking for Bradley Tompkins," Dominic said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the small room. Clara flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. The colour drained from her flushed cheeks. "Bradley doesn't live with us anymore. He hasn't for 3 years. If he owes you money, I don't have it." "He owes me a considerable sum," Dominic replied, slowly stepping closer. The closer he got, the more he wanted to reach out and pull her thick, soft body against his chest. He wanted to bury his face in her neck and inhale the scent of sugar and sweat. "He told my men he was coming here to collect it from you." "He tried," Clara whispered, looking down at her flour-covered hands. "He was here an hour ago. I told him I couldn't give him Toby's grocery money. He got angry, but the shop bell rang and he ran off. Please, I work 60 hours a week just to keep the lights on. I have nothing to give you." Dominic stepped right up to the counter. He was over 6 feet tall, easily towering over her. He looked down at her terrified, beautiful face, then over to the little boy, who was now watching them with wide, curious eyes. Dominic Caruso, the man who swore he would never have a family, felt an alien, terrifying thought lock into his brain. "This is mine now. The woman, the boy. They belong to me." "Bradley's debt is no longer your concern," Dominic said softly, his voice dropping to a hypnotic purr. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a thick stack of $100 bills and placed it on the glass counter. "For the discounted pastries. All of them." Clara stared at the money easily, $10,000, and then up at the terrifying, handsome giant in front of her. I can't take this." "You can and you will," Dominic ordered softly. "Take your son home, Clara. Lock the doors. Bradley won't be bothering you ever again." The transition from the tiny, sweet-smelling bakery back to the cold reality of the Chicago underworld was jarring. When Dominic slid back into the Maybach, the scent of vanilla lingered on his clothes, haunting him. Enzo turned around, awaiting orders regarding Bradley Tompkins. "Find Tompkins," Dominic ordered, his voice devoid of the strange softness it had held moments prior. "If he goes within 10 blocks of that bakery, or the woman and her child break both his legs, the debt is forgiven. He is forbidden from ever contacting Clara Jenkins again." Enzo's eyes widened slightly. "Forgiven, boss, with respect. He owes us 200 grand. Since when do we run a charity? Since I said so." Dominic snapped his icy blue eyes, locking onto his underboss with a lethal warning. "And pull the property records for Sugar and Spice Bakery. I want the mortgage bought out by tomorrow morning. Put it in a blind trust under Clara's name." As the car pulled away, Dominic stared out into the rain. He was a man who calculated every risk, but his mind was consumed by the image of Clara's heavy, soft curves and the fierce, protective fire in her eyes. He had spent his life surrounded by women who starved themselves to fit an impossible mold, women who sought his power and his wealth. Clara hadn't seen his wealth. She had only seen the danger, and yet she stood her ground to protect her child. She was fat, yes, gloriously, beautifully so, To Dominic it meant there was more of her to hold, more of her to protect, more of her to worship. And the boy, Toby. Dominic had felt an unfamiliar tightening in his chest when the kid looked at him. The commission wanted an heir, fine. He would give them one. He would adopt the boy. But first he had to conquer the mother. For the next 2 weeks, Clara's life changed in terrifying, inexplicable ways. First, the bank called to tell her the bakery's mortgage had been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. Then the broken oven she had been saving up to fix was mysteriously replaced overnight with a top-of-the-line commercial model. Finally, Bradley vanished completely. No late-night banging on her apartment door, no threatening text messages. It was a miracle, but Clara wasn't stupid. She remembered the man in the tailored coat. She remembered the dark, obsessive way his blue eyes had tracked her every movement. She felt hyper-visible. All her life, her weight had made her feel either invisible or deeply judged. Men didn't look at a size 22 single mum with the ravenous, consuming hunger that stranger had shown her. It defied logic. Late one Thursday evening, Clara was walking out of the back alley of the bakery, holding Toby's hand tightly. The alley was dark, the single street lamp flickering ominously. Suddenly a figure stepped out from behind the dumpsters. "Clara!" She screamed, pulling Toby behind her large frame. It was Bradley. He looked erratic, disheveled, and terrifyingly desperate. He held a rusty tire iron in his right hand. "Bradley, please!" Clara begged her heart, hammering against her ribs. "Leave us alone." "You ruined my life," Bradley spat, taking a step forward. "Those suited freaks caught me. They broke my arm, Clara. They told me to stay away from you. Who the hell are you sleeping with?" "You a fat, useless pig. What did you do to get the mob off my back and onto me?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara cried, tears spilling hot down her flushed cheeks. Toby was whimpering behind her. "Let us pass." Bradley raised the tire iron, his face twisted in rage. "You owe me, Clara. Give me whatever cash you have in that register, or I swear to God." He never finished the sentence. From the shadows, a massive silhouette emerged with terrifying speed. Before Clara could blink, Dominic Caruso stepped into the flickering light. He grabbed Bradley by the throat with one hand, lifting the struggling man completely off his feet. The tire iron clattered to the wet pavement. "I thought I made myself perfectly clear," Dominic whispered. His tone wasn't angry. It was entirely devoid of emotion, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Bradley choked his legs, kicking wildly in the air, his face turning a deep shade of purple. Dominic's grip was iron. "Stop!" Clara screamed, horrified. Not for Bradley, but for Toby, who was hiding his face in her skirt. "Please don't do it in front of my son, please!" Dominic's head snapped toward her. The dead look in his eyes instantly fractured. He looked at Clara's tear-stained face, then down at the trembling boy. With a disgusted scoff, Dominic threw Bradley into the brick wall like a discarded rag doll. Bradley slumped to the ground, gasping violently for air. "Rocco!" Dominic called out smoothly. From the darkness, a massive enforcer appeared. "Take out the trash! If he speaks her name again, cut out his tongue." "Yes, boss," Rocco grunted, dragging the sobbing Bradley away into the shadows. Dominic slowly turned his attention back to Clara. She was shaking violently, her chest heaving, the soft curves of her body trembling under her thin coat. He took a slow step toward her, stripping off his heavy Tom Ford overcoat. Gently, with a tenderness that shocked him, he draped the coat over her broad shoulders. It engulfed her, smelling of expensive cologne and rain. "Are you hurt, mia dolcezza?" he asked softly, his large hands resting lightly on her thick upper arms. Who are you?" Clara sobbed, looking up into his face. "Why are you doing this? My name is Dominic Caruso." he said, his thumbs gently smoothing over the soft fabric of her sleeve. He didn't hide his identity. He wouldn't lie to her. And I am doing this because you are mine now, Clara. You and Toby. I'm taking you home. You'll never be afraid, and you'll never struggle again. Clara shook her head, terrified by the dark promise in his eyes. I'm a nobody. I'm just a fat, tired mother. You don't want me. Men like you don't want women like me. Dominic's eyes darkened, a fierce, protective anger flashing in them. He stepped directly into her space, his chest pressing against her ample breasts, crowding her against the wall of the bakery. Do not ever speak about my woman that way. He growled softly, his breath fanning her lips. You are soft, you are beautiful, and you are exactly what I crave. I have enough cold, hard things in my life. I want you. Only you. He looked down at Toby, who was peeking out from behind Clara's legs. Dominic crouched down, unbothered by the wet pavement ruining his suit pants. He looked the boy right in the eyes. Are you a brave boy, Toby? Toby nodded, slowly, intimidated, but fascinated. Good. My name is Dominic. I'm going to take care of you and your mum from now on. Is that okay with you? Toby looked at his mother, then back at Dominic. Are you a superhero? A dark, genuine smile tugged at the corner of the Mafia boss's mouth. No, kid, I'm the villain. But from now on, I'm your villain. He stood up, scooping Toby effortlessly into one arm, and wrapped his other strong arm around Clara's thick waist, pulling her flush against his side. The ruthless king of Chicago had finally found his queen, and heaven help anyone who tried to stand in his way. The drive to Lake Forest was a blur of rain-slicked roads and heavy, suffocating silence. Clara sat frozen in the back of the Maybach, her large, soft hands gripping the edges of Dominic's oversized Tom Ford coat. Toby, exhausted from the sheer terror of the alleyway and the late hour, had fallen fast asleep against Dominic's broad, tailored shoulder. The ruthless Mafia boss held the 5-year-old boy with a surprising, terrifying ease, his massive hand resting protectively against Toby's back. Clara couldn't tear her eyes away from the sight. It defied every rational instinct she possessed. This man was a monster, a criminal who had just choked a man half to death and ordered him thrown away like garbage, yet he held her son as if Toby were made of spun glass. When the car finally rolled through a set of towering wrought-iron gates, Clara's breath caught in her throat. The Caruso estate was a sprawling, modern fortress of glass, dark stone, and manicured hedges, sitting on acres of private property that backed up to the frigid waters of Lake Michigan. It was a world so far removed from her cramped, drafty 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat that she felt a wave of profound nausea. I can't stay here, Clara whispered, her voice trembling as the car pulled up to the grand entrance. Mr. Caruso, please. This isn't right. I don't belong in a place like this. I'm a baker. Look at me. She gestured helplessly to her flour-stained apron, her cheap, scuffed sneakers, and the thick, undeniable bulk of her thighs. I don't fit in your world. Dominic shifted his gaze from the sleeping boy to her flushed, panicked face. His icy blue eyes softened a dark, consuming heat, replacing the cold detachment that usually resided there. Your world was trying to break you, Clara. It let a parasite like Bradley threaten you. From this second forward, my world is your world, and in my world you are a queen. He didn't wait for her to argue. The car doors were opened by silent, heavily armed guards. Dominic stepped out, carrying Toby effortlessly, and waited for Clara to follow. The grand foyer of the estate was a masterpiece of black marble and vaulted ceilings. A severe-looking older woman in a crisp uniform stood waiting. Mrs. Gable, Dominic said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Prepare the East Wing master suite for Clara, and set up the adjoining room for Toby. Have the kitchen prepare a hot meal. Something comforting. Right away, sir. Mrs. Gable replied, her eyes briefly, flicking over Clara's dishevelled heavy frame without a single ounce of judgment, a testament to her professional discipline. The next 48 hours were a surreal fever dream for Clara. She was given a bedroom larger than her entire bakery, complete with a sunken soaking tub and a king-sized bed adorned in Egyptian cotton. For Toby, it was a paradise. Dominic had a small army of staff transform the adjoining room into a child's wonderland, complete with a massive train, set shelves of books, and a custom-built bed shaped like a pirate ship. Toby was entirely unfazed by the sudden change in scenery. To him, Dominic was the giant superhero who had chased away the bad man and bought him an infinite supply of toys. But for Clara, the anxiety was a living, breathing thing. She felt exposed in the sprawling mansion, her insecurities honed by a lifetime of society, telling her that a fat woman was unworthy of luxury or desire, gnawed at her sanity. She spent the first 2 days wearing the baggiest sweatpants she owned, hiding in the suite. On the third evening, the heavy oak door to her bedroom clicked open. Dominic stepped inside, loosening his silk tie. He looked exhausted, carrying the heavy burden of running the Chicago syndicate. But the moment his eyes landed on Clara, the tension in his jaw vanished. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her thick arms wrapped around her soft, prominent stomach, defensively. "You've been hiding," he murmured, walking slowly across the plush carpet. "I'm out of my depth, Dominic," she confessed, her voice cracking. "I appreciate the safety, I really do. But I see the way your guards look at me. I see the women who wait for you in the lobby of your downtown office building on the news. They are thin, glamorous, perfect. I am fat. I am tired. I have stretch marks and a mummy belly. I don't understand what you want from me." Dominic stopped directly in front of her. He dropped to his knees. The ruthless head of the Caruso family, a man who bowed to no one, knelt on the floor before a crying, plus-size baker. He reached out his large, calloused hands, gently prying her arms away from her stomach. "Those women you see on the news, they are ghosts," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble. "They are sharp edges and empty heads. I don't want a ghost, Clara. I want a woman." He placed his large hands flat against the soft, yielding curve of her belly. The touch sent a violent shiver down Clara's spine. "I want warmth. I want softness. I want a woman who fights for her child. Every curve on your body, every mark is a testament to your survival and your strength." He leaned forward, pressing a warm, reverent kiss directly to the center of her stomach through her cotton shirt. Clara gasped, tears spilling over her cheeks. No man had ever touched her there without a hint of disgust or a request to turn off the lights. Dominic looked up at her, his eyes blazing with a terrifying, absolute devotion. "You are exactly as you should be," he whispered, standing up and pulling her to her feet. He wrapped his arms around her thick waist, burying his face in her neck, inhaling her sweet vanilla scent. "But we have a problem, mia dolcezza." Clara stiffened, fear returning. "What problem?" "The commission." Dominic said, his tone turning dangerously cold. "Word has reached the other families that I have taken a woman and a child into my home. Don Carmine, the head of the ruling council, has called a formal sit-down. They want to meet the woman who finally managed to leash the rabid dog of Chicago. And they want to meet the boy who might inherit my empire." Clara's blood ran cold. An empire, Dominic Toby, is just a little boy. He's not a Mafia heir. "He is, if I say he is," Dominic growled, holding her tighter. Tomorrow night we attend the commission gala at the Drake Hotel. You will stand by my side. You will show them that you belong to me. And if any one of them disrespects you, I will burn their territories to the ground. The atmosphere inside the Gold Coast ballroom at the Drake Hotel was suffocatingly opulent. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, casting a warm, deceptive glow over the deadliest men and women in the Midwest. The room smelled of expensive cigars aged Scotch and danger. This was the highest echelon of the criminal underworld, the Commission. Clara stood in front of a massive gilded mirror in a private dressing room off the main hall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Dominic had refused to let her wear her cheap department store dresses. Instead, he had flown in a private tailor from Milan who specialized in dressing voluptuous women. Clara was draped in a custom deep crimson velvet gown that clung to her heavy curves like liquid fire. The bodice supported and displayed her lush breasts perfectly, while the thick, rich fabric hugged the broad slope of her hips and draped elegantly over her stomach. A diamond necklace, heavy and cold, rested against her collarbone. She looked powerful. She looked expensive. But beneath the velvet, she was trembling. Dominic stepped up behind her in the mirror's reflection. He was devastatingly handsome in a bespoke black tuxedo, looking every inch the ruthless king. He rested his large hands on her thick, bare shoulders, his thumbs gently stroking her skin. "You are breathtaking," he murmured, his eyes dark with possessive pride. "They will choke on their own jealousy." "I'm terrified, Dominic." Clara admitted, her voice a fragile whisper. "These people, they kill for a living. What if they hurt Toby?" Dominic spun her around, his grip firm but gentle. "Toby is safe at the estate, guarded by 30 of my best men, and no one in this room will touch you. Not while I have breath in my lungs. Do you understand?" Clara nodded slowly, drawing strength from the absolute certainty in his gaze. He offered his arm and she took it, bracing herself, as the heavy oak doors opened and they descended the grand staircase into the ballroom. The moment they appeared, the low hum of conversation vanished. Hundreds of eyes snapped toward them. Clara felt the weight of their stares, the silent, harsh calculations being made. She saw the pencil-thin mob wives, whispering behind manicured hands, their eyes raking over her large, full figure. She wanted to shrink, to fold into herself, but Dominic's grip on her arm tightened, anchoring her to the floor. He walked with a terrifying, unhurried grace, leading her directly toward the raised VIP table at the center of the room. Sitting at the head of the table was Don Carmine, an aging but lethal man with snow-white hair and dead, calculating eyes. To his right sat Lorenzo Batista, a younger, brash boss from the Detroit faction, who had always resented Dominic's meteoric rise to power. "Dominic!" Don Carmine rasped, raising a crystal glass of bourbon. "You finally decided to join the realm of the living. And you brought a guest." "This is Clara," Dominic said, smoothly pulling out a chair for her before taking his own seat. "My future wife, and the mother of my son." A collective murmur rippled through the nearby tables. Lorenzo Batista let out a harsh, barking laugh, leaning back in his chair and eyeing Clara with blatant disgust. "Wife," Lorenzo sneered, his gaze lingering cruelly on the soft curve of Clara's stomach, pressing against the velvet gown. "Come on, Caruso. We all know you have strange tastes, but this is a joke, right? You bypass the daughters of every respected family in the syndicate to bring home a bakery cow. Tell me, Dominic, do you have to roll her in flour to find the sweet spot?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the air from the room. Clara's face burned with intense, agonizing humiliation. The old familiar shame of her weight rushed back, choking her. She looked down at her lap, tears pricking her eyes, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. Dominic did not shout. He did not curse. The movement was so fast, so incredibly fluid, that Clara barely registered it happening. Dominic stood up, reached across the white linen tablecloth, and grabbed Lorenzo by the lapels of his tuxedo. With a terrifying surge of raw, brute strength, he hauled the Detroit boss entirely over the table, shattering crystal glasses and sending expensive china crashing to the floor. Before Lorenzo's body even hit the carpet, Dominic drew a heavy, silver-plated, customized 1911 pistol from his shoulder holster and jammed the barrel directly into Lorenzo's open, screaming mouth. Women screamed. Bodyguards reached for their weapons, but Enzo and a dozen of Dominic's men had already drawn theirs, aiming at the room. A Mexican standoff erupted in a matter of seconds. "Dominic, stand down!" Don Carmine roared, slamming his fists onto the table. Dominic ignored the Don. He stared down at Lorenzo, whose eyes were wide with primal, suffocating terror. The ruthless boss of Chicago looked like a demon, his handsome face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated violence. "I want you to listen to me very carefully, Lorenzo," Dominic whispered, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the ballroom. "That woman you just insulted is the Queen of Chicago. Her son is my legal heir. If you or anyone in your pathetic family ever looks at her with anything less than absolute reverence, I will skin you alive and hang you from the Mackinac Bridge. Not if you understand." Lorenzo, tears streaming down his face, nodded frantically around the metal barrel. Dominic slowly withdrew the gun, wiping the barrel on Lorenzo's silk tie before holstering it. He stood up straight, adjusting his cuffs, his breathing perfectly, even as if he hadn't just nearly started a mob war. He looked around the room, his icy eyes daring anyone else to speak. No one moved. He turned back to Clara. She was trembling, her hands covering her mouth in shock. She had known he was dangerous, but seeing the monster unleashed on her behalf was entirely different. It was terrifying, and God help her, it was intoxicating. Dominic offered his hand to her. "Come, mia dolcezza," he said softly, his tone shifting instantly from homicidal to tender. "The air in here is stale. Let's go home to our son." Clara placed her trembling hand in his large, blood-stained one. As he led her out of the silent, terrified ballroom, Clara realized the undeniable truth. She was no longer just a struggling baker. She was the protected obsession of the most dangerous man in the city, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely, beautifully safe. The aftermath of the gala at the Drake Hotel sent a seismic shockwave through the Chicago underworld. Overnight, Clara Jenkins transitioned from a nameless plus-size baker to the most feared and protected woman in the Midwest. The men who operated under the Caruso banner, hardened criminals, and ruthless enforcers now bowed their heads when she walked past. They had seen what their boss was willing to do for a single slight against her. Dominic's violent display of devotion had cemented her status. To insult Clara, to even look at her soft, heavy curves with anything less than absolute respect, was a guaranteed death sentence. For Clara, the adjustment was a slow, overwhelming process. She was a woman who had spent her entire adult life apologizing for the space she took up. Society had conditioned her to shrink, to hide her broad hips and thick thighs beneath baggy clothes. But Dominic Caruso worshipped the very ground she walked on. In the private, shadowed sanctuary of the master suite, he spent hours worshipping her body. He traced the stretch marks on her belly like they were sacred ruins, burying his face in the soft, plush valley of her breasts, murmuring Italian praises against her flushed skin. He made her feel like a goddess of abundance in a world starved of warmth. He replaced her worn-out wardrobe with custom-tailored silk cashmere and linen that celebrated her size 22 figure. Toby, meanwhile, was flourishing. The pale, anxious little boy from the cramped apartment was gone, replaced by a confident child who ran through the manicured gardens of the Lake Forest estate, trailed by two massive, stoic bodyguards who treated him like a prince. Dominic had immediately set his high-priced lawyers to work on officially adopting Toby. The paperwork was moving through the Cook County courts with unnatural, terrifying speed. But true peace is a luxury the Mafia cannot afford. Lorenzo Batista had returned to Detroit with a bruised ego, a shattered jawline from Dominic's brutal grip, and a heart full of venom. He had been publicly emasculated by the Caruso boss over a woman he deemed entirely unworthy of the crown. Lorenzo knew he couldn't attack Dominic directly. The Caruso syndicate was too vast, heavily armed, and deeply entrenched in the city's political infrastructure. If Lorenzo wanted to destroy Dominic, he had to take the very thing Dominic had just declared as his weakness. He had to take the boy. Lorenzo's men had spent weeks quietly tracking the Caruso family's movements. They needed an inside angle, a pawn who was desperate, expendable, and familiar with the targets. They found Bradley Tompkins in a rundown motel off Interstate 94, nursing a shattered arm and a severe drug addiction. Bradley was terrified of the Caruso name, but Lorenzo offered him $2 million in untraceable cash and a private flight to Costa Rica. All Bradley had to do was provide the logistical opening Lorenzo's hitmen needed to snatch Toby. A brisk Tuesday morning in late October provided the perfect storm. Clara had insisted on taking Toby to his scheduled pediatrician appointment at Rush University Medical Center on the near west side. Dominic had vehemently opposed the trip offering to bring the city's top doctors to the estate, but Clara had firmly put her foot down. He needs to leave the house. Dominic, she had argued, standing her ground in the grand foyer, her hands resting on her soft, prominent hips. He's a little boy, not a prisoner. He needs normal experiences. Dominic had relented, though his jaw was clenched tight. He dispatched Enzo and a heavily armed four-man detail to accompany them in a reinforced SUV. The appointment went flawlessly. Clara held Toby's hand as they exited the private VIP elevator into the hospital's underground parking garage. The concrete space was dimly lit, echoing with the sound of their footsteps. Enzo walked point his hand, resting casually inside his jacket near his shoulder holster, scanning the perimeter. "Can we get ice cream on the way home, Mommy?" Toby asked, swinging Clara's arm playfully. "If Enzo says it's safe to make a stop." Clara smiled, looking down at her son. "We can route through a secure drive-through, Miss Clara," Enzo replied with a rare, genuine smile. They were 50 feet from the armored SUV when the fluorescent lights overhead abruptly popped, plunging the section of the garage into shadowy darkness. A screech of tires echoed through the concrete cavern as two unmarked black vans suddenly blocked the exit ramp. "Gun!" Enzo roared violently, shoving Clara and Toby behind a concrete pillar. Deafening gunfire erupted. The metallic ping of automatic bullets, striking concrete and steel, filled the air. Enzo and the Caruso enforcers instantly returned fire, their training kicking in. Clara hit the cold, greasy floor of the garage, pulling Toby beneath her large, soft body, completely shielding him. She pressed his face into her chest, her thick arms wrapping around him in an unbreakable vice. She was terrified, tears streaming down her face, but she did not scream. Her maternal instinct overrode the panic. "Mommy, it's loud," Toby whimpered, pressing against her belly. "I've got you, baby. I've got you," she chanted, her body shaking as concrete dust rained down on her hair. Amidst the chaotic crossfire, a figure sprinted out from the stairwell behind them. Clara glanced back, her heart stopping. It was Bradley. He looked wild, his eyes blown wide, holding a suppressed handgun. "Give me the kit, Clara!" Bradley screamed over the noise, pointing the trembling gun at her head. "I'm not leaving without the kid. Lorenzo is going to pay me." "You're out of your mind!" Clara shrieked, kicking out with her heavy legs, trying to put distance between them. "Bradley, they will kill you." "They're going to kill me anyway," he yelled, lunging forward and grabbing Toby's small arm, trying to rip the boy from beneath Clara. Adrenaline, pure and unadulterated, flooded Clara's system. She was not the same defeated, exhausted woman from the bakery. She was the queen of the Caruso Empire. With a feral, gut-wrenching scream, Clara surged upward, using her substantial weight and size to her advantage. She threw her entire body forward, slamming her broad shoulder directly into Bradley's chest. The impact knocked the wind out of him, sending him crashing backward onto the concrete. The gun clattered out of his hand, sliding under a parked car. Bradley scrambled frantically on the filthy garage floor, reaching for the weapon, but Clara was faster. Driven by a primal need to protect her son, she brought her heavy heel down squarely on Bradley's already shattered arm. The sickening crunch of bone was accompanied by Bradley's agonizing, high-pitched scream. Before Bradley could recover, the heavy thud of combat boots echoed nearby. Enzo had flanked the attackers. With cold surgical precision, Enzo dispatched the remaining Detroit hitmen with a suppressed rifle, the garage falling into a deafening, ringing silence. Enzo rushed over his weapon, trained directly on Bradley's head. "Miss Clara, are you hit?" Enzo demanded, his eyes scanning her frantically for blood. "No." Clara gasped, pulling Toby back into her chest, rocking him. "I'm okay. We're okay." Enzo looked down at Bradley, who was writhing in a puddle of motor oil, weeping in agony. The underboss pulled out his secure phone and dialed one number. He didn't even wait for a greeting. "Boss, ambush at Rush Medical, Detroit Hitman, and Tompkins. We have the target secured. Clara and the boy are unharmed." A sound came through the phone's speaker that made even Enzo, a seasoned killer, shudder. It wasn't a voice. It was a guttural, demonic roar of pure, unleashed violence. "Bring him to the Navy Pier warehouse." Dominic's voice finally came through, devoid of any humanity. "And get my family home." The drive back to Lake Forest was a blur of police sirens paid off by Caruso lawyers to look the other way and heavily armed escorts. When the SUV finally breached the gates of the estate, Dominic was waiting on the front steps. He wasn't wearing his usual immaculate suit. He wore a black tactical shirt, his sleeves rolled up, revealing thick forearms corded with tension and dark, sprawling tattoos. Before the car had even fully stopped, Dominic tore the reinforced door open. He reached in, hauling Clara and Toby out together, wrapping his massive arms around both of them. He buried his face in Clara's neck, his chest heaving. Clara could feel the ruthless, terrifying Mafia boss trembling against her soft body. "I'm sorry." Dominic choked out his hands, gripping the thick fabric of her coat. "I'm so sorry, Mia Dolcezza. I should have been there. I should have killed him that night in the alley." "You're here now," Clara whispered, her hands running through his dark hair. "Toby is safe. I'm safe." Dominic pulled back, framing her full, flushed face in his large hands. He kissed her deeply, a bruising, desperate kiss that tasted of fear and absolute ownership. Then he looked down at Toby, checking the boy for a single scratch. Finding none, his icy blue eyes hardened into twin chips of frozen hellfire. "Take them inside. Lock down the estate. No one gets within a mile of the perimeter." Dominic ordered his security chief. He turned back to Clara, his voice dropping to a low, lethal murmur. "I have to leave for a few hours. I have to clean up a mess." Clara grabbed his wrist. She knew exactly what he was going to do. The old Clara would have begged him to stop to call the police to be a better man. But the new Clara, the woman who had just fought off an armed kidnapper to save her child, understood the dark, necessary rules of the world she now inhabited. "Make sure," Clara said, her voice shockingly steady, "that Lorenzo never thinks of my son again." Dominic's eyes widened slightly in surprise, a dark, reverent smile spreading across his handsome face. He lifted her hand, kissing her knuckles. "As you wish, my queen." In a freezing, abandoned shipping warehouse near Navy Pier, the scent of rust and damp earth filled the air. Bradley Tompkins was tied to a steel chair under a single blinding halogen light. He was sobbing, begging for a mercy he didn't deserve. Opposite him, suspended by heavy iron chains from the ceiling, hung Lorenzo Battista. Dominic's men had intercepted Lorenzo's private jet at O'Hare Airport before it could even fuel up. Dominic walked into the circle of light holding a heavy steel crowbar. He didn't monologue. He didn't offer a villainous speech. He simply went to work. The screams that echoed through the empty warehouse that night were so horrific that even Enzo had to step outside to smoke a cigarette. Dominic systematically dismantled Lorenzo, ensuring the Detroit boss felt every ounce of the terror Toby had felt in that dark garage. When Lorenzo was nothing more than a ruined, silent testament to Dominic's wrath, the Chicago boss turned his attention to Bradley. "Please," Bradley gagged, spitting blood. "She's just a fat bitch, Caruso. Why ruin everything for her?" Those were Bradley Tompkins' final words. Dominic didn't delegate the execution. He swung the heavy steel bar with the force of a freight train, ending Bradley's pathetic existence instantly. 3 days later, the underworld was entirely silent. The Detroit faction had officially surrendered their territories to the Caruso family, terrified by the mangled remains of their boss that had been delivered to their headquarters in a pine box. The ruling commission formally recognized Dominic's absolute authority, and no one dared question the woman by his side. Inside the sunlit solarium of the Lake Forest estate, Clara sat on a plush velvet chaise lounge. She was wearing a sheer, sweeping silk robe that clung beautifully to the heavy, soft curves of her breasts and stomach. She was reading a book while Toby played on the carpet nearby with a brand new set of toy cars. The heavy mahogany doors opened, and Dominic walked in. The blood was washed away, the monster locked back in its cage. He was a man coming home to his family. He walked over, entirely ignoring the priceless antiques in the room, and knelt on the floor beside Clara's lounge. He buried his face against her soft, plush stomach, wrapping his thick arms around her broad waist. "The adoption papers cleared this morning," Dominic murmured, looking up at her with eyes full of a love so deep it was almost terrifying. "Toby's last name is officially Caruso. He is my son. And you, Clara Jenkins, are going to be my wife." Clara smiled, running her fingers gently through his dark hair. She was fat, she was soft, and she was fiercely loved by the most dangerous man in the city. She had traded a life of struggling and invisibility for a gilded cage of steel and sugar. But as she looked down at the ruthless king kneeling at her feet, she knew one undeniable truth. It wasn't a cage. It was a throne. 6 months later, the bitter Chicago winter had thawed into a brilliant, blooming spring. The Caruso estate in Lake Forest was unrecognizable, transformed from a cold, imposing fortress into a breathtakingly vibrant venue. Thousands of white roses and lush green vines draped over the wrought-iron gates, the grand balconies, and the sprawling stone courtyards. Today was the day the undisputed king of the Midwest underworld was taking his queen, and he had spared absolutely no expense to ensure the world knew she was the most revered woman in the city. Inside the sprawling master suite, Clara stood before a towering three-way antique mirror. She was no longer the exhausted flower-covered baker, trembling under the weight of debt and fear. She was radiant. Her wedding gown was a masterclass in haute couture, designed specifically for her by the most exclusive atelier in Paris. Dominic had flown the designers to Chicago with one strict instruction: do not hide her. Celebrate her. The dress was a vision of heavy ivory silk and intricate chantilly lace. The bodice was a structured masterpiece, lifting and showcasing her full, lush breasts with a deep sweetheart neckline. The heavy silk cinched tightly at her broad waist before flowing out in a dramatic, sweeping train that elegantly draped over the soft, prominent curve of her stomach and the thick, beautiful flare of her hips. Her dark hair was pinned up in loose, romantic curls woven with diamonds that caught the morning light. "Mummy, you look like an angel," a small voice chimed from the doorway. Clara turned, a brilliant, tearful smile breaking across her flushed face. Toby stood there looking impossibly handsome in a miniature custom black tuxedo that matched Dominic's perfectly. The past 6 months had erased the shadows from the little boy's eyes. He was a Caruso now, confident, protected, and endlessly loved. "Thank you, my sweet boy," Clara whispered, crouching down, despite the heavy gown, to pull him into a tight embrace. "Are you ready with the rings?" Toby patted his silk pocket proudly. "Enzo showed me how to hold them. I won't drop them, Mummy. I promise." "I know you won't." She kissed his cheek, her heart swelling with an overwhelming, profound gratitude. A gentle knock at the door interrupted them. Enzo Falcone stepped into the room, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit. The battle-hardened underboss, a man who had killed without hesitation to protect this family, looked at Clara with a deep, unwavering reverence. He offered his arm. "It is time, Miss Clara," Enzo said softly. "The boss is waiting." The ceremony took place in the estate's sprawling back gardens, overlooking the shimmering sunlit expanse of Lake Michigan. Rows of white mahogany chairs were filled with the most powerful and dangerous figures in the country. Don Carmine sat in the front row, his aged face an unreadable mask of respect. But Clara didn't look at the crowd. The moment the string quartet began to play a hauntingly beautiful classical arrangement, her eyes locked entirely on the end of the aisle. Dominic Caruso stood beneath an archway of white roses. He was breathtaking. The harsh, ruthless edges of his chiseled face were entirely softened by the look in his icy blue eyes. It was a look of pure, consuming worship. He wasn't looking at a mob wife or a political alliance. He was looking at his salvation. As Clara walked down the aisle, her arm looped through Enzo's, she felt the weight of the stairs. But this time there was no judgment. There was only awe. She walked with her head held high, the heavy silk of her dress swishing around her thick thighs, her curves fully on display, and entirely unapologetic. She was fat, she was beautiful, and she was stepping into her power. When Enzo handed her off, Dominic's massive hands immediately engulfed hers. He pulled her close, uncaring of the hundreds of eyes watching them. "You are a vision," Dominic murmured, his deep baritone vibrating in the quiet spring air. "My beautiful, perfect queen, and you are my villain," Clara whispered back, a joyful tear slipping down her flushed cheek. The vows they exchanged were not traditional. They were written in the quiet, desperate moments of the night, forged in blood survival, and a love that defied all logic. When Dominic slid the massive, flawless diamond band onto her finger, he didn't just vow to love her. He vowed to burn the world down to keep her warm. "I claim you, Clara," Dominic said, his voice ringing out clearly over the silent crowd, establishing his absolute dominion and her absolute safety. "Before God and everyone present, I declare that my life, my empire, and my soul belong to you. You are the heart of the Caruso family, now and until my last breath." When the priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, Dominic didn't offer a polite kiss. He hauled Clara against his chest, one massive hand tangling in her jeweled hair, the other gripping her thick waist, and kissed her with a bruised, desperate passion that left the entire crowd holding their breath. The reception that followed was a dizzying blur of champagne laughter and unbelievable luxury. But the true shift in power happened later in the evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the estate in a warm golden glow, Don Carmine approached the head table. The music quieted the room, holding its breath. The aging head of the commission did not look at Dominic. He looked directly at Clara. Slowly the old Don reached out, took Clara's soft, plump hand, and bowed his head, pressing his lips to her knuckles in the ultimate sign of absolute fealty. "Cent'anni Queen Clara," Don Carmine rasped, "may you rule with warmth, and may your family prosper for 100 years." It was the final seal of approval. The Midwest underworld had officially bowed to a plus-size baker from the South Side. Late that night, long after the guests had departed, and Toby was safely asleep in his pirate ship bed, Dominic and Clara retreated to the master suite. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, locking out the dangerous world they ruled. Dominic slowly unbuttoned his crisp white shirt, his eyes dark with a familiar intoxicating hunger, as he watched Clara pull the diamond pins from her hair. She turned to him, the heavy silk gown slipping off her broad shoulders, pooling around her waist. She stood before him, fully embracing her size, her curves, and the fierce, undeniable beauty that had brought a monster to his knees. Dominic crossed the room, dropping to his knees before her, just as he had done months ago. But there was no fear left to banish. He pressed his face against the soft, warm curve of her stomach, his strong arms wrapping around her lush hips, holding her like she was the only real thing in his universe. Clara ran her hands through his dark hair, looking down at the ruthless Mafia boss who never wanted an heir, but who had given her a kingdom. She had tamed the beast not with steel, but with sugar softness, and a love that would echo through the Chicago underworld for eternity. Thank you for experiencing the thrilling conclusion of Dominic and Clara's story. If you loved watching this ruthless Mafia boss fall completely for a sweet, plus-size single mum, make sure to hit that like button and share the video with your fellow romance lovers. We bring you high-stakes drama, passionate love stories, and unforgettable twists every single week. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Leave a comment below. What was your absolute favorite moment from their incredible journey? See you in the next gripping tale.